Embattled crypto CEO Sam Bankman-Fried may be ready to finally face the music following his indictment and arrest for causing the downfall of cryptocurrency exchange FTX. According to a Washington Post report, an employee at the Fox Hill prison, the Bahamas' only prison where SBF is being held, the young executive is in, quote, good spirits.
SBF's attorneys have tried bailing him out to no avail, and questions now remain. Will he stop fighting extradition and come back to the U.S. to face charges? Here to discuss is Associate Editor at Reason, Liz Wolfe. Welcome, Liz.
Thanks for having me.
Liz, this case couldn't get any crazier. We talked about in the previous segment the doxing allegations that Elon Musk had. In this case, we could literally track this guy's flight as well while he was trying to run away from his own criminality. Can you break it down for us? What do you think is going to happen now? How do we get here?
I mean, nobody really knows, right? Of course he's scared, though. He's being brought up on 8 possible charges. If he's convicted of all counts, he'd be spending upwards of 115 years in prison. People are calling this one of the greatest financial frauds in American history. He absolutely has no career after this. There's no comeback. And I think one of the really sad things is that he was one of the people who is very much spearheading this effective altruism movement and one of the people calling for regulation of the cryptocurrency industry. Now both of those legacies are very much tarnished, or the effective altruism legacy is tarnished by what happened to him. And now I think the landscape of crypto regulation will be fascinating to watch. Bankman-Fried has very much left his mark, but not in a good way.
So you're right. So that's my first question to you would be, you still seem to think that, cryptocurrency is still good and that effective altruism is still good. Why shouldn't we see in Sam Bankman-Fried's downfall the evidence that both of those things were just too easy to be co-opted by private interests and scams?
I mean, I think so many things can be co-opted by terrible people serving, evil ends. Fraudsters and hoaxers and grifters happen of all political stripes in all types of movements in all types of industries. And so that's why it's really important to hold them accountable to the fullest extent that we can when we do uncover them, as well as being discerning and skeptical of where we put our money. There's no such thing as a get-rich-quick scheme. Whenever you're seeing huge returns, you should also be aware of the fact that you're shouldering a huge amount of risk. And it's not as if some of those financial fundamentals have changed. I think that in terms of cryptocurrency regulation, though, one of the things we always see after these scammers are uncovered, whether it's Sam Bankman-Fried or Do Kwon back in May, is that the really serious people within the cryptocurrency industry, the Brian Armstrongs of the world, frequently respond to this by saying, good. It's a good thing that FTX was exposed. It's a good thing that Bankman-Fried will now be facing time in prison. It's a good thing that some of the hype will be diminished and that people will be a little bit more skeptical and a little bit more discerning. So I think it's actually a really positive sign. You can kind of tell who's a serious crypto industry person versus who is in it for the get-rich-quick element based off of how they respond to these scammers. And I think that's really heartening. That's something I always see the serious people in the industry looking at this as a necessary purge.
My question was going to be, what does this tell us for the future of crypto? It seemed from its inception like somewhat of the modern day gold rush. You saw a lot of people getting involved, particularly minorities. I've seen several articles about how Black people invested in large number in this new emerging economy. What does a scandal like this do to the apparatus that is crypto?
That's a great question. I mean, I think it's really important to sort of get people back to reality. But I've also always been a huge advocate for blockchain technology specifically. It's not necessarily, it's sometimes hard for me to see the use case of crypto specifically in terms of how long transactions take to process. It's hard from where I'm sitting right now to see crypto being the thing that replaces credit cards, for example, in any sort of short timeline. But the thing that undergirds that, the blockchain technology that Bitcoin is reliant on, the protocol, is, I think, really interesting because it's this opportunity to cut out middlemen and to ensure a high degree of trust and reliability. So one of the areas in which I really see the best blockchain use case is real estate. You know, when you're buying a house and you have 30 days where you basically go back and forth with a whole bunch of lawyers and realtors and a bunch of documents, and you're basically trying to verify that the line of credit that a bank is extending to an individual is that's a smart move, that the individual is representing themselves accurately, that the actual asset is something that the bank ought to be funding. There's so many components of this, but basically you have an entire industry of very well-paid middlemen. And blockchain, I think, has some value from that perspective of basically making it so that these types of transactions can be higher trust and more reliable. So I think the technology still has some value. There are still use cases for it, but we should always be concerned about get-rich-quickism. That's not typically a good thing. And so frequently, like what you're talking about, it's more vulnerable groups, more vulnerable people who are newer to that, to the game, who are going to possibly be most hurt by it. And so this is a really useful reminder that we all have to be extremely skeptical with how we approach pretty much anything in the realm of finance, because there will be bad actors like Sam Bankman-Fried that will attempt to hurt our bottom line. So we need to be very careful.
Well, the crypto world was left rocked by the FTX debacle. Crisis after crisis drove major crypto companies into bankruptcy, including BlockFi and lenders Digital Voyeur and Celsius Network, among others.
The unstable and often money-losing bet that crypto turned out to be sent several one-time believers to the exit. And the crypto meltdown is being heard in Washington, too. Senators Elizabeth Warren and Roger Marshall introduced the Digital Asset and Money Laundering Act of 2022 just last week, which would prevent cryptocurrency users from hiding behind blockchains, as these blockchains would have to be registered financial institutions. So would getting Congress involved prevent meltdowns of the scale we've seen, Liz, or how do you see this playing out?
I'm always super concerned whenever Elizabeth Warren introduces regulation about the degree to which this opens up the door for regulatory capture and cronyism and rent seeking. I think, Sam Bankman-Fried was one of the biggest people advocating to be regulated. And he was specifically advocating for CFTC regulation instead of SEC regulation. Like, he was very specifically trying to get regulated by agencies that he thought he could have more influence over. And I think that there's a lesson there. And I think libertarians have been saying this for a very long time. But we should be very, very careful about how regulations could possibly be used by one company to attempt to thwart their competitors. I think we saw a lot of that with Sam Bankman-Fried, and we saw a little bit of that with the FTX Binance relationship. So that's definitely a big takeaway that should make us very cautious and concerned about Warren's legislation. That said, I also just generally think that Warren doesn't really understand the things she's regulating, and I think that is especially true for the cryptocurrency industry and for some of the things they're saying about blockchain. And I'm not totally sure they understand what they're talking about.
Liz, but how could you not see this as like an indictment of like cryptocurrency more broadly? Like the very fact that there's no ability to oversight, that the whole thing is, I mean, it just seems like it was a house of cards that was perfectly, if you were Sam Bankman-Fried, you could not have designed a better system for getting away with something like this than to use something like blockchain than cryptocurrency that is not tethered to anything. I hear what you're saying about, regulations and whatnot. It's sort of, it's very American to want to be able to trade with people and do your own business and have the government butt out. I'm so with you on that. Like, that's sort of one of the most fundamental American values. But at the same time, like, how is this not an indictment of crypto more widely?
Well, I think that argument holds a lot of water if Sam Bankman-Fried gets away with this and spends no time in prison. But I think the fact that he's facing possibly 115 years locked away is pretty good evidence that these types of financial crimes still matter when applied to the cryptocurrency realm, and are taken very, very seriously, that we have existing regulations and laws on the books that do prevent against this, or perhaps not prevent against it, but ensure that those who do commit frauds at this level will be held accountable. And so I think the degree to which prosecutors are being very aggressive with this, as they should be, is actually good evidence that this type of thing can be stamped out and will continue to be stamped out. But I think something that you're tapping into that I very much understand and appreciate is that it is hard for consumers, for people who are just getting into this, to know what type of exchange they ought to be using and to know where to trust. And so I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about how cryptocurrencies work and how you, as a consumer who maybe wants to get into it but doesn't know that much, how you ought to conduct business. I think it's also just like a very hard financial time. We're dealing with some really bad conditions in terms of like the stock market, in terms of high inflation, in terms of labor market funkiness. And so I think it's a little bit of a dark time where a lot of people were sort of struggling to figure out how they should navigate it. I have a lot of empathy for that. And I think it's important for this type of thing to be highly publicized so that people can be, buyer beware, basically. There's a certain caveat emptor takeaway that I think will be really valuable. People should be really suspicious of hype. And we saw a lot of hype for quite a few years with cryptocurrency.
Liz, I know you're going to disagree, but I actually am in favor of Elizabeth Warren on this one and more regulation, because this is everyday people's money. And seeing them lose it in something like this is quite frankly saddening. Great to have you, and more Rising after this.